I tell my clients, like, your mental health is like the filter you're looking at everything through.
Hello, my name is Elle Harris, and thank you so much for checking out the 7 podcast. So today we are talking about mental health, and we are sitting down with one of my good friends, Ashley. Ashley is a mental health professional. She's a therapist, but she's also been one of the biggest supporters to me in some of the darkest times of my life. And so I wanted you guys to experience some of that conversation we've had over the years and just how that works when you're dealing with something and going through a mental health, space. So check out this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think. Hello, everyone. Welcome to 7. I'm Elle Harris. This is a mini podcast series that I'm doing with some of my closest and just greatest friends or confidants. And I'm so happy about this because we are really doing the first episode today. And you'll learn throughout the series, these episodes kind of build on top of each other. And it's pretty much like I'll let her introduce herself before I go into that. But how they build upon each other is based on what I feel is the best way to really tackle who you are and your self-actualization and being your best self, being your authentic self. So I will allow our guest to introduce herself.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Fayak. I have known Elle for probably 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
Yeah. And I am a mental health therapist and used to work with Elle at one of the community organizations we used to work at. And I primarily serve clients who are like working with trauma and really deep traumas and wounds and grief and anxiety, and have my own private practice doing that.
And it is called
Healed in the Wild.
Yes. An amazing name. It's amazing. Like, you are the reason why I go hiking and do all the things. And I really wanted Ashley to be here today because she is very instrumental into me tapping into who I am and tapping into the little girl inside of me who was wounded for so many years. And I was actually in Ashley's office one day and we were just talking about, I think I was just doing like a interview, just kind of checking in on her as far as an employee. And then somehow this flipped on me. And while we were talking, I was telling her how, a physical therapist had told me to let the little girl inside of me die. Like, I needed to write a letter and burn a letter and just let her die. And in that conversation, Ashley said, don't let her die, let her grow with you. And I promise you, and I over exaggerate everything, I'm dramatic, but it just felt like the little girl just rose up like in that moment. And you were like, you need to go on play dates with her. You need to go get ice cream. You get to do all of those things with her. Like, everything that she missed, give her that moment. It was the first time that someone had been gentle with the little girl that had been broken for, at that time, probably 35 years.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was like, it's okay. Like, we can grow together. And I think sometimes, like, for me, I've always had that little girl locked. A lot of people talk about that, almost like that syndrome when you feel like you're locked at a certain age. And I think I felt that for so long, like, why am I paying bills? I'm too young to be paying bills. Like, just like all of those types of thoughts,
Yes.
not realizing that it's this little girl who's pretty much dominant in my life because she's still trying to be seen. And that's the comfort, that's the protection. And like letting her know that she doesn't have to protect me anymore. Now it's my time to protect her and to nourish her. So that was the start of things for me mentally. I will never, ever forget that day as long as I live. Because like literally after I left there, I had a conversation with my mom. Then I learned some things that happened to me in my childhood. And then I had to fix my face and then go to the YWCA for Women of Distinction honoree. And I was like, how can I be present here? And I just had this whole epiphany today. So it was a day that changed my life. And just like, I think over the next couple of years, you have just been, of that time frame, you had just been so instrumental in helping me through so much mentally. And, just dealing with postpartum depression and having a baby and contacting you. And again, it was just like I think that I always tell people, when you get a therapist, you should be mindful of the type of therapist that you receive, right? So
Yeah.
for me, I've always needed a therapist who reminded me of a kindergarten or preschool teacher. Like that person who's like super creative, very
Yeah.
kind, gentle voice, like listens to me, affirms. Like I need that because that's the part of me that's hurting.
Yeah.
Right? I don't need anyone who's going to be like, "Girl, you can do this." Girl, did it. I don't need like a
Yeah.
whole lot of like negative reinforcement, or I need gentle therapy. Like, and I think that's so important because some people will naturally just flow with someone who looks like them, someone
Yeah.
who has similar experiences. Like, oh, they were in the military. I was in the military. They will understand. Sometimes that's not what you need. Sometimes you need
Right.
a part of you nurtured that's hurting and what that part of you needed. So that's my thought. So getting into this, I feel like I said a lot. How do you feel that mental health really affects like your daily life?
Yeah. I think, and I do appreciate everything you said. I think it is so much like a pair of sunglasses that you're wearing, right? And I tell my clients, like, your mental health is like the filter you're looking at everything through. So if your sunglasses have some dust on them, that dust is going to reflect on everything around your relationships, how you see yourself, how you view your relationships, how you're attached in your relationships to other people, how you interact with your coworkers, right? So I really think mental health really is just like a toolbox, right? That you develop from the time you're born. And
Mm,
everything that gets put in that toolbox by yourself or other people then gets used on other people and yourself. So if that toolbox isn't in a healthy place or in a good place, those tools that come out in conflict or how you're talking to yourself, how you're viewing the things that are happening to you
yeah.
cause suffering because they're not being, it's like using a hammer on a screw, you know
Mm,
what I mean? Like it's not going to work correctly. And so you really just have to take it all out and examine all your tools like you were talking about. Like you have to build on what are those tools, what are those things that I have in my life and are they working, are they not working?
mm.
And that's how like I view mental health every day is doing that.
I love that. I love the whole like, the vision I see in my head of like the glasses and the having the dust in the glasses because you're right. It filters everything. So whatever experience you're having, whether that's like a bad relationship with a significant other, if you
Yeah.
don't clear it off, if you don't figure out how to clear off the dust of that last relationship, you're gonna bring it into the new, and you're gonna view everything with that same lens. And I think we don't give ourselves time to like breathe and dust off the glasses.
Yeah.
So I guess looking at it from that standpoint, practicing it on a daily, on an everyday basis would be like bringing in how we dust it off. So what do you think? How do we make mental health like a daily practice for us?
So I think it really is individual, right? Like not one single routine works the same for everybody. And so what I did myself and what I encourage other people to do is to look at who you are value wise, right? Like, do I like the person I am when I'm interacting in relationships, when I'm interacting with myself? Do I like the mindset I'm using? Like, am I too negative? Am I like really depressed, really anxious? Like, do I love being me and going out into the world? And if that answer is no, like, where are the gaps and what am I not doing right? So for myself, I had really severe anxiety and I had to really step back and stop asking myself, like, why am I so anxious all the time? And I had to shift into that, like, what is happening in me? What is like it that I need? What values do I need? What food do I need? What mindset do I need? And then it just becomes a daily routine based on that. So
Mm,
for me, it's like if I don't work out every like 3 to 5 days a week, I feel really terrible. If
yeah.
I don't meditate and get myself present, centered, my anxiety runs rampant with all the worst case scenarios and what ifs, and or the bad thing's going to happen, right? So meditation helps me. And then food is medicine. So I no longer feel like food is a coping skill. Like I don't feed myself just whatever's going to make me feel good in the moment, I look at it like, okay, what nutrients do I need? Do like gut health is super important, and like how am I like making my body and my brain work for itself versus like I'm being my own worst enemy and
Mm,
just doing temporary solutions for my problems.
love that. Because, and I guess like just thinking about people who may have never, if you don't have a mental health background or you don't, know really where to go, you've never been to therapy before, how do you get to a place of understanding like it might be time for me to go talk to someone or like something's not working. There's an imbalance somewhere because sometimes people don't see themselves, right? So how do
Yeah.
you get to a point where you're able to see yourself?
I would say, like, this goes towards like the stigma of mental health too. Like, stigma is so much like what you're taught
Mm,
about your emotions and how to deal with it. So, if your family is a sweep it under the rug family and we don't deal with it and we hide our emotions, and you're starting to feel like that is causing you more suffering, reach out to somebody, read a self help book. Like, most people start with the self help books and then they're like, oh my gosh, I loved reading this book and it helped me, but I don't know how to use it in real life.
mm,
But when even like in my own therapy and in like that I go to for myself and that my clients seek out therapy, it's always in the crisis moment, right? It's like
great.
I've broken down and my relationships are suffering. I have no one, or the relationships I have are having so much conflict, or I wake up every day unhappy, or I can't even go to the grocery store. That's when people start to say, like, well, I need help,
Yes.
especially men. Like, men do that the worst.
Yes.
And I say that from watching all my male clients go through that. But if you're not ready for therapy, that's okay. I think the first step is just recognizing I don't feel comfortable in who I am. And
Mm,
where is that coming from? Is it I feel sick every time I eat a certain food? It's I feel mentally unwell. Like, why do I always keep having these thoughts that keep spinning and spinning? And I spend hours in that.
mm,
Like, if you don't feel like life is enjoyable,
mm.
look at yourself, not everybody else,
Oh, that's
first and
good.
see where that's coming from.
I love that because I remember seeing a quote a while ago about I don't want a life that I have to vacation from.
Yes.
And that has been like something that I've made my motto now. Like I want a vacation because I want to experience something new, right? I don't want a vacation because this is just too much. I need to escape it because if I need to escape, that means when I come back, it's going to be waiting for me,
Yeah.
right? And I'll just continue to escape it. So me being able to build a life that I don't have to run from is me dealing with the life. And
Yeah.
sometimes that hurts, and sometimes it's painful, and sometimes it's looking at myself and figuring out what's wrong with me instead of me trying to heal others or fix others because of what's wrong in me and thinking
Yeah.
that that's going to satisfy my desire to feel better, right? It doesn't do that. I was thinking about I don't know if you've seen this thing that it happened actually thinking on Sunday. There was this pastor in Hampton, and he called a little girl up in his audience to come to the front of the stage and come in front of the church. And so I'm thinking his church may be like Holy Trinity Pentecostal, something in that realm.
Yeah.
Because it was like all women on one side, all men on the other. They had like little doilies on their head, and the girl comes to the front of the church. She's 14. You could tell she's probably in her first, going on second trimester of pregnancy. And he made her get in front of the entire church and say, I'm sorry that I got pregnant. Will y'all forgive me?
Yeah.
And so everybody stood up, they start clapping. You see, this is like completely breaking this little girl for several reasons. One, because she feels like she has failed. She
Yeah.
probably feels like God doesn't love her. She's now going to be condemned. People can say whatever they want. So she goes back to
Yeah.
her seat, and the pastor was like, don't, we forgive the sin, but when you sin, you need to come up here immediately and let us know. Don't take your time, and nobody in here better not be giving her a baby shower. I mean, it was rough.
That's awful. Spiritual trauma at its finest.
It was rough, and seeing that, so now it has sparked like an outrage, of course, on social media. So now here's the whole world, right? I'll throw her a baby shower. I'll be the event planner. I'll do this. Like all these God complex things I see coming up.
Yeah.
Because what everyone has failed to realize is now this has triggered you in some way, right? Because you feel
Mhm.
like maybe I was you, that could be me, yada, yada, yada. How do I fix it? Instead of
Yeah.
saying, this girl is like, people have been reaching out. She's like, no, I don't want to be bothered. Because what you have failed to realize is there's a deeper situation here. This is her community.
Yeah.
So even you coming in saying that you can financially support her doesn't give her community. And maybe the conversation is more so, hey, however you need support, no, you have a village out here willing to give you that support,
Yeah.
instead of making it about ourselves. But it's like those things. But and I brung her up because I thought about that whole stigma of therapy and church, right? Like
Yeah.
I know for me, like, church has always been therapy in the Black community for so many years. Like
Yeah.
even the pastors would counsel you, right? And sometimes if you have a pastor who, and I think that's why so many things have been put around now, those parameters of like, if you're not a licensed therapist, you can't call yourself a therapist because
Right.
you can be
Yeah.
sued as a pastor, right? But for so many years, pastors have been able to get that information and then go in the pulpit and use it against people.
Yep.
And so now there's a whole thing of trauma stemming around that. So when are you able to really get your story out? Like when are you able to break free of I can go beyond my church community and find community and be able to speak and say the things that's bothering me instead of just keeping it, here because maybe these
Yeah.
people don't mean the best for me either.
And that's the thing too, right? Like some people never break beyond that. And that's okay because they're not shown another option. They're not given opportunities to see that something's different, right? Like if that, let's say that child who then that 14-year-old girl stays in that community because financially now she has to because she has a baby and wants that baby to have what it needs and this is just comfortable. Like so much of mental health is how our brain works, and our brain works off of experience and expectation. So, if my experience is being in this church family and this environment, and I'm used to that, going out into the community and finding a different way of life and breaking out of that takes a tremendous amount of effort because the whole time afterwards, your brain is saying, well, they can change. Or what if it's different if I go back and I'm different, so they'll be different? Like, it's not going to be the same as it was before because your brain wants to feel comfortable. And what was comfortable was that environment. What's not uncomfortable is going out and being and doing something new.
Mm-hmm.
And so that doing and being something new takes time and building and letting your brain acclimate and that's why people do like 21-day challenges and like now they're saying 21 days is 6 months, right?
Wow.
And
Okay.
right? So like your brain needs time to go from like this is my baseline where I'm in church in this environment and here's the newness. My brain has to have time to rise up and baseline at the newness or it's constantly going down and down and down and that's where you get like the cognitive dissonance of like well they could be different. They won't treat me that way again. Like it'll be fine. Like really like gaslighting yourself and like really trying to like your brain is trying to just ease the pain of not being comfortable anymore. So I think that shows up in mental health a lot. Like I'll have clients who leave really abusive relationships or toxic family situations, right? And the whole for 6 months at least, they're doing that like, well, they weren't so bad. Well, yes, they were. That's why I left. But no, they beat me. Well, they could change, right? Like your brain the whole time just wants to be comfortable and know what it has experienced before. It's not going to like willingly want to do something different unless you have an experience that tells you, no, that's not the way I should be treated, or this is not what I think. If you're constantly questioning yourself, then that's a good sign that like you probably don't feel comfortable where you're at, you
Hey,
know? And so breaking out of that is really hard.
it's
Like,
a muscle, right? Because I think we
yeah,
forget that the brain is also a muscle.
yeah,
It goes based on the memory of that muscle, and you have
yeah,
to train that muscle to do something different. Like if I sit
Yep.
down 25 days out of the month and never go to the gym, when I start back going, my body's like, well, what are we doing here?
Hmm.
But the more and more I train it to do something different, it becomes accustomed to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same. But I feel like, no, I feel like the physical body, and you can kind of speak to this just with your experience. I feel like the physical body is easier to train than the mind.
Um, I th- so I have I'm trying to think which way to go with this. So maybe, but I think because the mind and brain are so interconnected that you need both to train both,
Mm,
right? Like if I want to go to the gym and I'm like, I'm going to lose that 10 pounds, but I got to get in the gym every day, there comes a point where I have to tell myself, like, why am I doing this? What is the value behind this? Why is it so important? And then that moves me into putting my shoes on,
mm,
but at the same time, like you said, our mind needs rehearsal. So physically, I need to put my shoes on and walk around the house 10 days before I ever make it to the gym.
mm.
Or I need to put my shoes on and walk outside 10 feet to where my brain now knows I'm leaving this house with these shoes on. And then eventually I make it to the gym, but without that mindset of telling myself, like, why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? What value is this going to have? Do I want to be stuck in this body I'm in forever? I
Yeah.
may never make it to the gym or to take those behavioral, physical responses to get there. So I
Mm.
think that's the disconnect. So many people are doing the physical, but not doing the mental work of it. And then they don't reach that goal or that like mindset they needed to get there, the discipline.
Oh, that's it. You hit it. Because I was literally thinking about myself. Like I had this last year. I started this whole practice of 8:30 at night. My phone is on do not disturb. I turn off, like I did have some like little fake electric candles. I put them on. I go in the shower. I do my like whole skincare routine, all of those things. Then I prepare to go to bed. And I had been doing that like religiously for a couple of months. And then something happened. And
Yeah.
then something else happened. But it was like I would always give up that self care time. I would always sacrifice that, right? It's always like I would sacrifice me to take care of something else. But I think it's exactly what you just said. Physically, I was doing those things. Like I was able to every night turn off, but mentally, my mind was still in the thought process of I can neglect myself for the
Mhm.
sake of others.
Yeah.
And I never looked at it. So now it's like working on that mental part. Why am I doing this? Why can't I neglect myself instead of saying no? Hard no. Is
Yeah.
anybody in danger? No. Is anyone dying? No. I have to stay committed because that's what I do. As
Yeah.
a mom, as a wife, I can quickly say, "Oh, let me sacrifice my time, my energy, my health journey to make sure
Yeah.
everybody else is covered." And we really have to dive into why we do that.
Yeah, and it's a daily practice of just doing that too, right? Like, it's funny you said that because I had someone recently ask me, like, well, my doctor says I need therapy because I'm on anxiety medicine. And, they said I need cognitive behavioral therapy. What is that? Like, from your perspective as a therapist, what should I do to get rid of my anxiety? And I started listing the things I did when I first started out and what I do now
Yeah.
consistently. And they were like, do you even enjoy your life? I sure do because I'm not having panic attacks 4 or 5 times a week. And
Right.
I'm not waking up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. freaking out for no reason and feeling so uncomfortable in my body. Do I drink Starbucks coffee every day? Do not. Like, I will occasionally have one, but I don't drink caffeine at all. Right.
Mhm.
And some people are like, well, cool, you meditate, right? Like I can't even do that. There's so many different types of meditation and training your minds. Like you don't have to sit down for 10 to 30 minutes and just be silent. You can go out and hike, you can go walk, you can do a craft, but as long as you're being present in that
That's
situation, that's what you need. But it really is like training your brain every day to say like, well, no, that's not true, or where's the evidence for that thing? And doing that all the time. Mental wellness is not an emergency skill. And so if
mm.
you have a panic attack and then I ask you, well, what have you done this week? to make your anxiety worse. Well, I did all these things. I'm like, okay, so you have all this evidence of how you've had anxiety because you've ate like crap. You haven't focused on yourself. You're working 60 hours a week with no time for yourself or your family. Like, you're not tuning into your relationships. And so those are all in chaos. But if you switch it a little bit and you're just like 5 minutes a day, I can focus on me and figure out what it is I need, then I can go out and be my best self to everybody else
Mm,
and even just enjoy being yourself. Will you have to eliminate things? 100%.
you will.
Things will start falling off. People will fall off.
Yeah.
Environments will fall off, but you will no longer be suffering in your own self,
Mm,
So,
I love that. You said a lot. You said a whole lot there. I'm trying to like take everything in. Mental health is not an emergency skill. Mental
yeah,
wellness is not an emergency skill.
yeah,
That is like the quote of the day. I have to write this down. It is, because I think that's what we want. We want a quick answer to feel better. Like we want the dopamine shot. We want the hurry up, I feel good. All right, I can get back to this. When it's a lifetime of lessons and little things that added up to get you where you are. And now it's gonna take some time to unpack those things because I don't want the quick remedy. I want the lifetime of mental well being.
yeah,
And that's what I'm in for. And whatever it takes to cut because of those things, it has to go. Even if it hurts, it has to go. Because mental wellness can leak out in so many. Mental illness doesn't necessarily have to be schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. It doesn't have to be all of those things. It can seep out in me having now high blood pressure or
yep,
diabetes. And we don't
yep.
think about how our mental capacity affects the rest of our body.
Yeah. I think there's like a statistic somewhere that's like a certain percentage of people who come to the ER for heart attacks are actually panic attacks. So like
Mm.
so many people think that they're physically dying and looking on Dr. MD Google, right? Like, why
Yeah.
am I having a headache? And it's like brain tumor. But maybe your headache is coming from all the stress,
Yes.
and if we can just decompress a little
Mhm,
bit, take an actual deep breath, not this, but an actual deep breath where you're tuning into yourself,
mm.
like so much of your stress just eases, right? And if you do that every day and you're not just using it when you're having a panic attack and you feel like you're dying, then your nervous system stays regulated the whole day. So it does impact your physical being, I've seen a documentary recently about cancer patients, and when they watch funny videos every day and they only allow people to speak positive words around them and there's no negativity, how much that improves their ability to overcome cancer. And like, because words do impact the way your body receives them, and then it turns it into like some chemical reaction which then doesn't help your cancer cells to go away,
Right.
right? So it just, it's all connected, like everything intertwines.
I love that. That brings us to our last question. Just kind of how you said that, like all those that positivity and hearing those words can affect you. So I'm thinking about childhood, right? So, things that we've seen or things that may have happened or things that you've experienced in your childhood, how can that show up as an adult? And is that a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a normal thing. Good or bad depends on how you're using what shows up, right? Like so much of what I told you in the beginning of
Yeah.
our friendship, right, is like so many people are so ashamed and hiding in that fear. And like, whether you want to think of it as an inner child or it's your shadow self, everyone loves shadow work now, and or your unconscious process, right? Our brain stores everything to protect us.
Hmm.
And so, for instance, like if you've had childhood trauma, let's just say you've been sexually abused,
Hmm.
and you go into a relationship with a man and you got those sunglasses on, your whole life has been this sexual trauma that you haven't dealt with. You may choose a partner who is sexually abusive, and that's not your
Hmm.
fault. It's because that toolbox you've been carrying around, like I mentioned before, has all these unhealthy skills and tools that you've developed from childhood, how people responded to you, telling them about your traumas,
Hmm.
like feeling safe in your own body. And then you take that and that child inside of you is like, oh my gosh, it's normal to be hurt in relationships. So let's pick a man or a woman or a partner who is also sexually abusive and coercive. But then it shows up in other ways too, right? Where like if you're doing the work, you now notice like, oh, my inner child who's been abused is showing up, and I need to speak to that child or that unconscious process and unlearn those skills. So it's everybody does it. It's just to what degree, right? Like people who hate yelling. Well, did your parents yell at you a lot when you were growing up? Or was there like all my military clients, right? You've been yelled at 50,000 hundred times by your commander who wants you to get the job done and forget about yourself.
Yes.
Now, when you're out of the military, you're showing up and you're saying, in relationships, forget the emotions. We got a task to do,
Yeah.
right? We got the house to clean. We got a job to do. Forget emotions, forget ourselves, right? And then you got all the conflict. So it's normal for it to show up, whatever you want to call it. Just don't the stigma keeps you in it,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, this is normal, and it's so I'm weak if I go to therapy. I'm weak if I work on myself. I don't have any problems, right?
Yeah.
But you do, and they all are putting that dust on the sunglasses, or you're using all these incorrect tools in relationships, and really you just have to turn around and look at yourself, not be ashamed of all the things you've went through. When you were a child, you didn't get to choose those things that happened. We don't always get the parents we deserve either. So many of us go through abuse and trauma, and
That's real.
so many of my clients show up and hate themselves.
Yeah.
So it just, the first step is just realizing like you're not a bad person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so big that you say that, because you'll look at, like, when I think about that little girl, who I wasn't like, when you were talking about the military, I was like, wow, I've never even processed what that's done to me. Like I've never thought about that. Like I've never
Yeah,
thought about what that has taught my mind to do, as far as like I've always had this issue of self-worth. Like I struggle with it. I fight self-worth and I fight addiction. My
yeah.
addiction is like, some people think like addiction is simply the idea of being an
Like chemical
alcoholic.
dependency. Yeah.
That's not my addiction. I'm addicted to achievements, because if I
Yep.
don't achieve, then no one's going to care about me. If I don't achieve, then I have no worth, right?
Yeah.
However, I feel no accomplishment in achieving, right? And it's what you're saying, like you think that you're a bad person, or you think that you're not worthy of certain things, because that
Yeah.
is just what life has done. So you have people who are raising you, you have people that you're surrounded by, and they're raising you based on their trauma, right? They're raising you based
Yeah.
on their lens. So it may not be that they want to come and harm you and do these harmful things to you. And that's probably why some people are like, oh, they didn't mean it, because they went through this. So, they didn't mean it. But just because they didn't mean it doesn't mean that it's safe for you to be in that space.
Yeah. I always tell my clients too, like, just because you can humanize your abuser and have empathy for why they did the thing they did and have a relationship with them doesn't mean the impact wasn't real,
Yeah.
and that they don't have to be accountable for that impact.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean you can go and get repair for that, or that there's a capability for forgiveness or closure there? No, because not every person who's hurt us is capable of receiving the information they need to get to repair the things.
Mm,
So, when you talked about like not dealing with their military service, right? Like I don't see people as just their inner child. I see them as like all the parts,
yeah.
like the different levels of consciousness. Like you might have a child part, you might have a teenage part, you might have an adult part that went through some type of trauma. Either way, your brain is storing all of that. So it's just the root of the trigger now.
Yeah.
In EMDR, we call it adaptive information processing.
Mm,
So it's like every time my boss yells at me, I'm getting triggered. Okay, well, let's root that back down the little vine of that. Like, what's all attached? Sometimes it's work. Sometimes it goes farther into family. Sometimes it's a really random memory of someone yelling at you in preschool,
Right.
right? Like, so it's all the things. It's not just childhood. It's like your brain keeps adapting to keep you safe. And because of that, it might develop something or a response that you don't like. Like, oh, why does every time I go to the grocery store and I hear a loud bang, I suddenly think I'm being shot at? Well,
Mm,
you were in Afghanistan for like 6 months thinking you're being shot at all the time. That has nothing to do with childhood, right?
no.
So we're always growing and adapting, and our body is and brain is so amazing, and that it stores all that to keep us safe and living. But it doesn't always mean that it's adaptive and that
Right.
it's healthy. That your brain is holding on to all this.
Mm,
Now add childhood, teenage years, adult years, and all the same traumas. Now you got complex trauma
mm.
where now you got to undo all these to undo the current day trigger, which is tough.
Listen, I've learned about that complex PTSD because for so many years I thought that I suffered with like anxiety and depression. But then I was like, no, this is complex PTSD. There's all these different components that have led me here to this place. And it's like, because generally you're thinking about PTSD just being this like trigger from these traumatic situations. And
Yeah.
there's so many different elements that come into it. And I was reading this book, I can't think of the name of it about complex PTSD, and I was like, wow, this is me. Like it was almost like that Google, like I Googled this. This is what this is, but it was like repeatedly on the mark. And I think sometimes that we don't look at all of those other areas. We'll pinpoint one or two. And like you said, the I think the mind and the brain is one of the most beautiful things ever,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, there can be times where it's filtered for our protection. There are going to be some issues or some situations that have happened that your brain suppresses
Yeah.
that you don't even remember just out of safety.
Yep.
And then one day something can happen and boom, here it is. That thing has
Yep.
popped up, right? And so that's why the key to this is why mental wellness is so important. Don't look at
Yeah.
it as you're going to someone to tell you that all the things that are wrong in your life. Look at it as someone saying, all right, let's figure out how do you work in your best life, right?
Yeah.
How do you manifest your best life? No, you're not a bad person. If you have these negative thoughts that sound very dangerous and unsafe and unhealthy, where do they stem from?
Yeah.
And I think people just sometimes you'll feel like sick in your mind because of things that have happened to you. But if you never talk about why those thoughts are happening, if you never address it, then you're going to continue to program yourself in a way to think in those directions. So I think
Yeah.
especially when it comes to women and even men, that self-worth is something that we see a lot, right? Self-worth and that self-esteem we see a lot with women,
Hmm.
and that suppressing ourselves and putting everything up front, but figuring out why do I feel so low about myself? But
Yeah.
why is it okay to neglect my feelings and emotions as men, right? Like, does that make me tougher? Does that make me a real man by pushing all of those things down? And I think you have to get to the root of it and get a therapist like Ashley.
Yeah. Get some type of help, right? Like whether you start at like a lot of my clients will start at they'll start with medication first and they're like, okay, the medication is helping, but I'm still doing XYZ
Right.
and I don't want to be doing that anymore. Or, like you said, like some people will wait until they're at that point where they're having suicidal ideations and they're like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to be thinking these things. I don't want to die. Like I don't
Yeah.
want to leave my family. And so then they reach out, but that doesn't need to be where you start.
Yeah.
Like if you're mildly anxious and you want to feel better, you can get help. Like if you're having conflict, like I have a few clients right now who just like graduated college and they're like, how do I be an adult? No
Right.
one ever
That's
taught
hard.
me how to be an adult. So, how do I do these things? Like, if you feel like you don't have the skill, there is somebody out there who will teach you the skill.
Mm,
You don't have to keep going back to your parents who don't know how to do it or didn't teach you, or like friends who also don't know how to do it or teach you, right? Like, you can find things on YouTube and social media, but as that like actual like professional information, check your sources, right? Like so just start somewhere to open yourself up. It doesn't have to be going to a therapist. Like, just start somewhere and hopefully that leads you to the skills you need. And if not, then get more structured support. Sometimes coaching is better for people. Sometimes, like, going to a 6-month program is helpful. Whatever's going to fit you, just do that.
Yeah.
Don't stay in the same place.
I definitely want to go to like a silent retreat.
I was thinking about that. I was actually thinking about that. There
Mhm.
is a great place in Asheville, and it's called the Indigo Retreat. They have tons of retreats there just by different people, and they have a guy there who does silent retreats.
I think we need
You
to
should
do
look
it.
into it.
I think we need to do it. I think because something you talked about in the beginning is just that mindfulness and showing up. For so long, I've been against mindfulness and
Hmm.
meditation because I feel like it's so boring. But I also understand that, like you said, there's different variations of it. And once I remove myself from the thinking of like, I just have to box breathe and do this, but it's really about being present. And I have rarely been present for any moment in my life. While I'm in the moment, I'm thinking about the next moment,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, what's next? What do I got to do next? Oh, life has people will make you do that. Like, you have a baby. When are you gonna have another one? You get a degree. So what are you gonna do next? Like, nothing is
Well, your
over.
addiction is achievements, right?
Yes,
So if
yes.
you're sitting, a lot of my clients have this problem, and so did I at first. When you put yourself in a silent environment and all you have is trauma and you've
Mhm.
never looked at it, when you're silent in a calm space, your brain now thinks, I am safe,
Yes.
and now is the time to deal with it. So
Mhm.
I can't meditate because when I'm sitting still, I will start thinking about this trauma, that
Yep.
trauma, that trauma, that trauma, and then what do I replace it with? Well, I got to do the dishes. I got to do this at work. I got all this paperwork to do. I got to meet this friend at 12. I got to go to lunch. What can I do instead of thinking about this painful things that are coming up when I'm sitting in silence?
Yes.
And that's where like overproductivity comes from and busyness, right? Like, but we think our mind just won't shut off, but
No.
really your brain is telling you like, oh, you're safe.
Yes. Time
We're
to
being
talk.
quiet now. We're tuning in. Now we can look at this.
Yes. Yes. It's so weird. But like I have now come to the place in life of accepting that and like embracing that. So
Yeah.
like wanting
It's
to
not going to
sit.
hurt you. You're
Yes, yes,
not reliving it again.
yes, yes.
You're
It's
just
like
observing.
it's observing. And that's what
Yeah.
I feel like hiking. Like I literally have been out and I'm just like crying and I'm
Yeah.
just letting it out because I can be safe here. I can breathe here. I can see something and visualize something peaceful and I can talk about this and I can say as a child this happened to me and this is not what I wanted, right? And it's okay that I didn't want that. Right?
Yeah.
It's okay. I didn't do anything to no matter what people I didn't do anything to promote this, right? I
Yeah.
didn't do anything to promote these reoccurring things in my life. And I think that we have to do that. Like that's the only way that you learn to be gentle with yourself is by sitting square face to face with yourself and say, all right, it's time. And if you cannot do that alone, because some of us cannot, most of us
No.
cannot,
Yeah.
you need to contact someone to help you through that because you don't want to find yourself balled up in a corner
Yeah.
and no one can do anything. So I think that's you said some like you said, it could be a life coach. It may not be, a therapist, whatever you feel safe in doing and building from there. Because I've had all the practice, I've had all the tools and the instruments and the knowledge but when it hit the fan, I was like, okay, it's hit the fan. I've tried to
Yeah.
self-medicate, self-diagnose, use my friends for a little bit here and there. And it's like, no, it's no more. It's time to unveil all of this. It's time to go deep with this and fix this before you bottom out.
Yeah. I mean, I did the same thing too last year. Like all these traumas, like I'm a therapist. I'm like, I'm a therapist. I use my own skills on myself.
Right,
And
right.
my therapist told me, did you know that you're like intellectualizing your traumas?
Mm,
And so, no, you don't have any symptoms of PTSD, but every time we talk about your trauma, your symptoms of PTSD show up. You
wow.
don't got them every day, but when you talk about it, you've intellectualized it so much
Yeah.
that you just feel like it's normal,
Yeah.
right? It's normal to have this trauma. People do what they did because of how they are. But when you actually sit still and you think about it and you just be with yourself, and that's why I love going outside. Like, you ever notice how quiet your mind is when you're
Hmm.
hiking and you can actually choose what you want to think about
Yeah.
versus like letting it all run rampant? But going and sitting in front of somebody with your inner child and inside of there, your shadows, or whatever you want to call them, and having someone look at you and say, wow,
Mm.
like that is tough what you went through. That's all you need,
That's it.
you know?
And then he'll, this is me, when I first heard that, what do you mean that's tough? That's not tough. People go through worse, right? Because that's just what you keep telling yourself. No,
Yeah.
that was tough and that was not okay.
Well, a lot of us grow up with our parents saying, like, there's homeless people in Africa. What are you sad about?
Yes, yes. So then, so that just
Starving
wipes away
kids in Africa. I
everything.
mean,
That wipes away
you
everything.
know,
Like,
somebody always has it worse than you. So we don't
yeah.
need to validate your feelings.
Mm-mm.
No, everyone needs to be seen and heard. And it's so different sitting in front of a trained professional and having them say, wow, that is tough. When everyone around you is saying, like, man, that sucks.
Yes.
It's a little different.
Yep.
It's a little different.
Yeah. And tell another everybody else is moving on to the next conversation after you said it, but having someone sit down with you and unpack it and say that, or
Yeah.
say to you, you are gonna be a I remember the first time a therapist told me you're gonna be an amazing person. I was like, wow, you really believe that. Right? Like
Yeah.
that is like it's hard to hear good things about yourself when the world has told you so many bad things, right? Like you said
Yeah.
earlier, like it's the embracing that you are a good person. And when you're a person on the outside, like seeing a friend or a client say those things, it makes you emotional because like I wish you could see, what I could see. And I wish you could see all the amazing things. So I
Yeah.
I say to kind of wrap this up, I say thank you time and time again to you. I do not know where I would be on my healing journey if it was not for you. You have introduced me to a lot of amazing tools. And like I said, just that being gentle and me nourishing that. And now having a daughter. So I do
Mhm.
have those moments where my inner child gets to play with her. And that's probably why I'm her favorite parent. Because I'm such a kid, right? Like I
Yeah.
allow myself to be present in being a kid because I wish I had those moments. Like some of the toys are probably really for me. I'm not gonna tell her that, but it's like, having
Yeah.
those moments because what I don't want to do is live out my childhood through her. So instead of doing
Right.
that, I play. I let my inner child play as she grows and plays. So
That's
thank
so
you.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
but it takes work, right? It takes work to get there. And like I said, if I hadn't, we never had that conversation and those moments to like you teaching me to be kind and gentle with myself and as a mom and all of those things, I
Yeah.
feel like these moments, I love this podcast as well because I get to give you your roses back because you are phenomenal, an amazing therapist, an amazing friend. So I just thank you for who you are and walking in to your purpose and doing this and helping so many people. So thank you. Any last words
You're
that you have?
I want to say thank you. And I think that one moment was a moment.
Yeah.
And the way that I view it is that you took that one moment and you didn't stop.
Yeah.
And that takes a tremendous amount of courage.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should be proud of yourself for
Yes.
that.
I'm not gonna cry today. I'm not gonna cry.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our episode on mental health. I hope you were able to take some good takeaways. I hope you understand that it is okay to be in a space where you need a therapist. Some of us need it every day. It's just a good tune up, a good check in with yourself. But I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you check in with us next week. Thank you.